Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of our Intro to Music Tech course. Once again, I'm Dr. Brandon Vaccaro. I'm an Associate Teaching Professor of Music at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, where I coordinate our sound recording technology program. In this episode, we're going to start to explore the process of editing audio. And as you hopefully recall from one of our previous episodes, we talked a little bit about how editing audio and some of the sort of basic interface that we're going to see when we work on this in a digital audio workstation comes from the days of editing tape, when we were actually physically editing the media by cutting the audio tape and splicing it back together with adhesive tape. So today we're going to look at how the process is done in a digital audio workstation, and we're going to see that some of the same core concepts, specifically the need to create crossfades and fade-ins and fade-outs on our edits to make sure our edits are very clean, and also the process of getting things to line up at specific points in time will carry over from those days in tape. So here I have a Pro Tools session open, and in this Pro Tools session what we have is some audio that is typical of what we might see in an assignment for an Intro to Music Tech course. For the students who are actually taking this course at UMass Lowell, of course, this is an actual assignment that you will be doing. So in this audio recording, what we're going to hear is me reading the alphabet in the incorrect order. And I'm going to put on some headphones here. M, B, M, E, G, C, N, F, O, R, P, X, L. So, in any case, we can see that this is the alphabet in the wrong order. What we're going to do is look at some of the tools that are available. I'm working in Pro Tools right now, but the core concepts that I think we want to deal with this can be applied to pretty much any digital audio workstation. So one of the first things that we might want to think about are how are we going to splice up, or rather how are we going to chop up these sections of audio. And in Pro Tools we have a couple of different ways we can do that. That's handled by the trim tool, which allows us to trim portions of the audio off. We can switch over to the selection tool, in which case I can just take a section of this, which is a letter, and I used the Command E shortcut to separate that. We can also go into the Edit menu, and we can see Separate Clip at Selection. That's basically the same command. If you notice in Pro Tools, conveniently they show us the keyboard shortcut right there. B. So now I've got the letter B, and of course now I have the ability to use this tool to grab and move it around on my timeline. So one of the first things that I might do in an assignment like this is, of course, to go through and start splitting all of these letters apart into the separate regions. And of course I'm visually using the visual cues for where the waveforms are, with the understanding that, unlike in tape, it's very easy for me to go back and change and trim if I make a mistake and end up splitting this in the wrong area. I have the ability to regenerate that audio. So one of the things that we want to think about with this assignment is for an Intro to Music Tech course. So our editing for this, we're going to put this in the context, or a context at least, that we might regularly see in the world of music. It's going to be a little different than how we might edit this kind of audio if we were working on a book on tape or a podcast or something else where we don't really have any consideration about a musical grid as a key time element, where we might really want to focus instead on the natural rhythm of the speech, the cadence in the speech, and the overall timing and prosody. So be a little different. And for SRT majors, you'll come back and have the opportunity to do those types of assignments in a later course. But at this point, what we're going to do is think about editing this onto a time grid in time musically. And so one of the things with most DAWs, we have the ability to switch our timeline between different modes. And we could, for example, be looking at this in time code, which would be used in film and television. We could look at it in minutes and seconds and fractions of a second. Or in our case, we want to look at it in terms of bars and beats. And in this example, I have a tempo entered of 120 beats per minute, with the quarter note getting the beat. And what I want to do is go back and edit this into the correct order. Now, I could try and pull all of these sounds around on the same track. I think for my purposes, it's going to be easier if I create a new audio track. Create a mono audio track. I'm going to call this voiceover.edit. Just giving it a name that's relevant for me. This gives me a new track that I can edit this audio onto. Effectively, this would be, well, to use a tape analogy, this would be like editing from a reel of tape onto another reel of tape, rather than trying to edit a single reel of tape. So I know this was letter B. So I'm going to think about how I want to lay this out. And what I'm going to do, because this will allow us from some musical flexibility, I'm going to give myself a full 4 count. And starting at measure 5, I'm going to go ahead and put a marker for the letter A. And what I'm going to do is at 120 beats a minute, I think I'm going to put 1 letter per measure. So I'll plan on putting the letter B on 6. Now I'm just going to go through and find C. At this point, it's sort of like a video game, just going through and finding the correct things and editing them into the correct order.
M, E, G, C, N, F, O, R, P, X, L, S, D.
There's our D. Now, alternately, the other way that I could do this is I could just keep going through and dropping markers for each letter, and then just start editing each one into the correct place. It's really a question of which you think is going to be more time efficient. Each of them will get the job done. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and work through this. In the video, we'll likely either time-lapse this or cut this out and jump back in once I have these in the correct order.
X, T, K, H, U, A, W, Q, Y, J, I, Z, V, M, E, G, N, F, L, S, T, K, H, U, H, W, Q, Y, J, I, Z, V, M, N, E, S, T, A, O, U, U, Q, E, C, E, F, G, H, I, M, O, R, P, X, F, F, K, U, I, V, R, X, S, E, F, U, X, I, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z.
All right, so that's our first pass listening through. Hopefully, even coming through on the video at this level, you're able to hear that there are artifacts from the edits. Now, one of the things that we know is, of course, we didn't put any fades on any of this. But we also have these points where the audio is going to drop out. And inevitably, in a recording like this, there's some background noise. In that case, I think we can hear me take a breath at the end of one letter and taking an in, like breathing in at the beginning of another one before another letter. All of those little edits are going to draw attention to themselves. So we've got a couple of approaches that we could take for trying to edit something like this. One, we could make the decision that we are simply going to try and get rid of all of that and just maintain the actual letters. So we're going to go back and get rid of the breath sounds. And if that was the case, we might do a bit of tight editing. So in Pro Tools, the way we're going to add fades, we're going to use the selection tool, and we're going to select the area over which we want the fade to cover. I'm going to first show you how to do this from the menu, and then we'll mention the shortcut on this. So if I go into the Edit menu, go all the way down to Fades, go to Create, you'll notice the shortcut is Command F, relatively easy to remember because we're creating fades. And that will bring up, in this case, it'll bring up the fade in option. This is because I've selected over the beginning of a region, or a clip rather. So this gives me the option to create a fade in. Now we have a couple of different ways that we could do this. We can do a standard linear fade, and this would be the kind of fade that we would get if we were cutting tape and we made a crossfade. In fact, we can see on here, that's kind of the imagery that we're seeing, is the fade in comes up across here. If we imagine this was 2 tracks of audio and we cut it at some angle with a razor blade, this is the shape that we would get.
A, B.
And again, we could clear out the stuff in the middle. We'll talk at the end about another alternative way that we might go about editing this. And we'll talk about how in future classes we will likely use that technique over this when we're doing things like podcasts, books on tape, advertising voiceover, anything like that. In this context, because we're working again in a musical context, we're going to go with more of a tight edit. So here I have a fade out window. You can see it's basically the same kind of window. Again, we have a couple of different options just to cover some of the various options, and these are the same as what we would have seen on the fade out, or the fade in rather. We have what are called equal power slopes, and those come in a variety of shapes. We have what are called equal gain. At this point, we're not going to get into the technical details between equal power and equal gain. The important thing is just that after we make an edit, we go back, we draw a fade. We're going to take the time to really listen to it in detail and really do some critical listening and make sure that it sounds natural, that it's not drawing attention to itself. Ideally, what we really want is for the edit to be somewhat transparent. We want to be able to make it so that when someone listens back, they don't hear the artifacts of our edits. It sounds just as if this had happened in real time. And that's the goal that we're going for in our editing.
A.
So I can probably tighten this up a little bit. And of course, I could also go with a different fade if I wanted to get rid of some of that breath sound at the beginning. Go for more of an extreme fade in. You can see here, this is a shape that would be very difficult to have actually cut and done on tape because it's not at a fixed angle.
A, B.
And often what I find works well is doing this kind of slope on the fade in and a linear slope on the fade out. But again, we can try that with a couple of different fades and always go back and listen to it. What we find is that each one will need what it needs, and that's the fade we want to use. So I'm going to bring the mix view up for a moment because I'm going to show you one other trick because I am editing this, and this was recorded at a pretty good reference level.
A, B, C.
You can see that this is living, in this case, down around negative 20 dB full scale. Some peaks coming up a little bit above that, and some letters that have more pronounced transient are going to go quite a bit above that. But we still have plenty of headroom here. And for editing purposes, I'm not really worried about this clipping. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the signal level by quite a bit because I really, really want to hear into that background noise. I want to sort of listen past the actual letter that we're hearing and really try and hear the edit.
A, B.
So again, we can hear the artifacts of that. Now, Pro Tools right now in the version that I'm working on does have auto fades. So we're not going to hear any clicks and pops like we talked about as potentially being an issue when we were talking about editing before. However, we still want to go through and make sure that we are editing all of these by ear because we want these edits to sound as good as possible.
A, B, C,
We can hear the background noise coming in there.
C, C,
And this is
C,
much less noticeable.
C,
Pull that back a little farther.
C, D,
And maybe let's try a different shape on that fade out.
C, D.
And that's an example. Sometimes you listen to it and you think you might be able to find another option that sounds a little better.
D, E.
So that gives us an idea of some of the editing work that we need to do. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and run through and do all of that editing on these clips, and we'll probably time lapse or edit that out of the video and jump back in once I've got that editing done.
E, E, F, F, E, H, I, L, N, N, O, P, Q, Q, R, S, T, D, B, W, X, Y, Z, D.
All right, so we have that all edited in place, and we can hear it cleanly now.
A, B, C, D.
And as I mentioned, this is an approach that we might take if we were planning on editing this for music, primarily for use where we're going to put other elements in over this, and that's exactly what we'll be doing in the Intro to Music Tech course assignment that correlates to this. However, I mentioned earlier in a different situation, if we were doing something like a podcast or film and television where we were just going to have this as pure dialogue, this approach would actually be a little bit problematic for us because right now we've eliminated all of the background noise that's happening in between lines of dialogue in this portion that we're editing. If we then went to another portion where there were no mistakes, we would have to go back and do that same kind of cleanup work and editing. It gets very time consuming. So quite often we take a different approach, and I'm going to very quickly go ahead and demo that now. This isn't the approach I would necessarily recommend for this particular assignment. Again, right now we're working in a musical context, but I just want to make sure that we get a demonstration of this. So now I'm going to take this little snippet of audio that I left for myself at the beginning of this. I'm going to go ahead and expand this out. Get into the middle of this. Looks like maybe here. Got a nice long region. So I've got a click. It sounds like there's maybe my chair or something clicking while this was recorded. I'm going to get rid of that. Sounds like a keyboard click maybe. Alright, so now let's try and build a bit of a loop out of this. And let's see if we can crossfade out those clicks. Still getting a little bit of it. My suspicion is it's question of the place where I edited out the click sneaking its way back in. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. All right, so that's getting pretty close to acceptable. It's still a little louder on that click than I might like. But what I now have here is a region that I can use as the basis for some what we would call fill. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go in and I'm going to consolidate this clip. In this case, I actually am going to do it temporarily. I'm going to group it. So what this did in Pro Tools, this allows me to take those separate clips of audio and treat them as if they're one clip of audio. However, if I want to, I can still go back in and ungroup them and go back to the original editing. So this is a nice tool. I'm going to get rid of these fade ins and fade outs here. Drop that fill in. Audio going. I'm going to draw some crossfades here.
A, B, C.
So now I can use this fill to go back and fill in all those spaces where instead of having the silence that we were hearing before, instead we're going to have that nice fill that we created. And again, this would be an approach that we would take where we need to make sure that there's some background noise through all of it. Having a little bit of background noise through the entire audio is better in terms of covering our edits than having the super clean version that we edited here. And we can take a listen to that.
A, B, C, D.
So now, after hearing it with the fill, you can kind of hear how that edit starts to draw a bit of attention to itself. Now, in a musical context, or in some kind of abstract sound creation, like we might use this for in a future assignment, again, the little bit of background noise, or rather the lack of background noise, isn't going to cause any problems because there will be plenty of musical elements going. However, in the case of like pure dialogue, it would be far better to have that fill in place.
A, B, C, D.
And in a more advanced context, one of the things that I would do is I would go back into this audio and edit it in a way that allowed me to clean out that slight little bit of clicking that we're hearing there. In fact, very quickly, I will do that and give you a chance to hear that. Again, we'll probably fast forward through this next segment as I actually go back in and clean the audio up.
A, B.
And again, we could then swap this out for this one. Make sure those are crossfades. There we go.
A, B, C.
So that gives you an idea of how we might edit that if we were working on dialogue. So the important thing that we want to take away from this demo video is, again, the process of editing and moving things around. We're utilizing the timeline, and ideally we're using some type of grid function. We are also going to go back and create fade-ins and fade-outs using the tools available to us within our DAW. Again, Pro Tools has a relatively sophisticated fade-in and fade-out set of tools available. Every DAW is going to give us some ability to do this. The big thing is, again, we want to make sure we go back and listen to every one of those edits and make sure that they sound exactly like what we need them to sound like. Our job when editing audio is to be very detail-oriented. This is one of the cases, probably one of the rare cases in terms of editing audio or in terms of working with audio that we do find working with headphones is actually very advantageous. In this case, I find it's really helpful for me to be able to turn the headphones up pretty loud and really stay focused on the minutia as I'm editing. Again, I wouldn't mix this way, I wouldn't do many other audio tasks this way, but it works great when it comes time to edit and be able to get in and do the detail work. So we're going to come back in a future episode and cover a little bit more about the Digital Audio Workstation. We've actually, again, got a couple of episodes that are all part of the Digital Audio Workstation series, and we'll see you in the next episode.